I slammed my car door. My hands were trembling. 5 minutes earlier, I'd received an official-looking notice pinned to my gate, a notice from the Lakeshore Springs Homeowners Association. A single phrase leaped off the page, bright red and underlined, "Permanent dock removal." Right then, I realized this was not a friendly, neighborly suggestion. It was a cold threat. A declaration that my beloved dock, the one that had belonged to my father, would be torn down. I've always heard about HOAs acting like mini dictatorships, but it never occurred to me that I'd become the prime target of their wrath. They wanted my dock gone immediately, and they didn't care what it meant for me or anyone else. That was the first day I made a promise to myself. I'd do whatever it took to keep my dock, even if it meant taking on the entire HOA. I just didn't imagine it would escalate so far that I would end up threatening their favorite fishing tradition in return. I stepped onto my front porch, the letter still in my hand. The words blurred and refocused, my mind stuck in a loop, replaying the moment I saw that alarming message. According to that notice, I had 30 days to comply with a regulation I had never heard of, or face staggering fines. My father's dock wasn't just any piece of wood perched over the lake. It was a precious slice of history. He'd built it himself decades ago, shaping each plank with his bare hands. When he passed, I inherited this lakeside cottage and its battered old dock. I hadn't done much to renovate it. Honestly, I loved its weather-beaten charm. The boards felt like an extension of him. At first I tried to remain calm. I called the number on the letter. A female voice answered with a sugary veneer that thinly masked her condescension. "Lakeshore Springs Homeowners Association, Karen speaking. How may I help you?" I cleared my throat, introduced myself, then explained about the notice. She didn't wait for me to finish. "Yes, I'm aware. The structure is non-compliant. You'll have to remove it." Her voice sounded final, and that single phrase, non-compliant, somehow felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. I asked her to clarify which covenant I'd supposedly violated. She sighed dramatically. Article 14, Section B states that all waterfront structures must be pre-approved by the HOA board and meet specific guidelines. Your father's dock apparently never received that approval. I tried to point out it existed long before the HOA was even formed. I tried to mention grandfathered rights. She cut me off. "That's irrelevant. Once ownership transfers, the structure is subject to current standards." I felt my anger flare, but I forced a polite tone. "That dock is older than you, Ms. Karen. Don't you think we should consider historical precedents?" She let out a small laugh. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules. You can comply or face legal consequences, and I suggest you hurry. We're quite serious about deadlines." Then she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief. That was my first direct contact with Karen, the president of the Lakeshore Springs HOA. I had no idea at the time just how far she would go to exert her control. Later that afternoon, I found my neighbor Dave looking uncomfortable as he checked his mailbox. He gave me an apologetic glance. Apparently he'd heard rumors that Karen had singled me out. "She's done this before," he whispered. 2 years ago, she forced an older couple to paint their house bright beige because she hated their brick color." He looked around nervously, then leaned in. "But I'll warn you, if you plan to fight her, prepare for war." That phrase, "prepare for war," reverberated in my head. I marched back into my cottage, set the dreaded letter on my dining table, and started researching. I'd never dealt with an HOA before, let alone one run by a woman so unapologetically rigid. But if she wanted a conflict, she'd picked the wrong guy. I had time. I worked as a freelance web developer, which let me keep my own schedule, so I devoted an entire day to reading every single article, covenant, and bylaw I could find about Lakeshore Springs. By nightfall, I'd uncovered something, a mention of grandfathered structures under certain conditions. It was vague. It suggested that any structure predating the HOA could remain as long as it was maintained safely. That was my potential loophole. But the language was ambiguous, offering the HOA board wide discretion. On top of that, there was a complicated passage about how changes in property ownership might void that grandfathered status if the new owner didn't get official reapproval. For me, that meant Karen could claim I needed to tear it down or reapply. That single article gave her the ammunition she needed. The next day, I tried calling the HOA office again. This time, a bored-sounding assistant answered. She told me Karen was in a meeting. "Could you have her return my call?" I asked politely. "This is urgent." The assistant promised to pass on the message. She never called back. On day 3, I received a second notice in the mail, an official violation warning, stamped in bold red. It cited potential fines, an ultimatum. My frustration boiled over. I typed out a detailed email citing my father's construction logs and a few relevant local property codes I'd discovered. I ended the message by requesting a hearing before the HOA board. Within hours, Karen responded. It was a brief message but dripping with arrogance. "Mr. Parsons, the board will convene next Tuesday to discuss your dock. However, I strongly recommend you begin removing it to avoid fines. We remain firm on this stance." When Tuesday arrived, I drove to the Lakeshore Springs Community Hall. I braced myself for a formal meeting, but the second I walked through those doors, I realized I was entering a lion's den. The board sat behind a long folding table. Karen, seated in the middle, wore a tight-lipped smile. Her eyes flicked in my direction, then slid away as if I were of no importance. Sitting beside her were 2 other board members. A tall, heavy-set man in a suit who kept adjusting his tie, and a silver-haired woman wearing large glasses. I took a seat in one of the plastic chairs set up for visitors. Only 3 other people were there. The emptiness felt eerie. Karen began the session by reading from a list of infractions that the HOA had found in the community over the past month. She rattled off minor issues: an overgrown lawn, a basketball hoop that was too close to the curb, a fence that needed repainting. Then she got to me. "Regarding the Parsons dock situation, the board has determined that the structure fails to meet safety guidelines and was never approved. Mr. Parsons must remove said dock within 30 days or face a monthly fine of $200.00, escalating by $50.00 each month until removal is complete. If he fails to comply, the HOA will pursue legal action to enforce compliance." She glanced at me. Her eyes gleamed with a hint of superiority. She paused, as if daring me to speak. I cleared my throat, stood, and said, "May I respond?" She folded her arms. "Briefly." I explained that my father had built the dock well before the HOA was formed, that it was structurally sound, that I had documentation of minor repairs done over the years. I even tried to emphasize how it had never obstructed anyone, never caused an issue. Karen tapped her foot. "With all due respect," she interjected, "your father's timeline is not relevant. We have modern standards for a reason. Structures must meet them or be removed." The heavy-set man nodded. The silver-haired lady stared at her notes. I felt the weight of futility. "I see, so there's no grandfather clause?" I asked. Karen offered a tight little smile. "We have the power to revoke that when the property changes hands, as it did when you inherited the home." "Sorry." She didn't sound sorry. She sounded smug. I tried to remain composed. I demanded they at least come inspect the dock to confirm its safety. Karen gave a curt nod. "We will schedule an inspection next month. However, that doesn't change the removal requirement." I realized it was pointless to argue further. They had made up their minds. Before I left, I caught her final remark. "We do this to preserve the overall property values of Lakeshore Springs. We hope you understand." Back home, I slammed the door again. Same frustration as before. I stared out my window at the dock, remembering how my father used to fish there every weekend. A wave of memories crashed over me. The day he first handed me a fishing rod, the time we replaced a rotting plank together, the sound of the lake water lapping against the beams at night. My chest tightened at the thought of losing that piece of him. Over the next week, the storm in my mind intensified. I discovered that not only did Karen want my dock gone, she was pushing for the construction of a brand new community pier just a short distance from my property line. I heard from one neighbor that she believed my dock obstructed her ideal vantage point from her living room window. Another told me she was in talks with a local contractor who had ties to a member of the city council. The more I dug, the murkier it became. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, a letter arrived from Karen, personally. Should you fail to comply with our request, the HOA will have no choice but to erect a safety fence around your property's water access, effectively preventing you from using your dock. That line infuriated me. They were threatening to fence me out from my own land. I had to do something. So I hired an attorney, Mr. Whitmore, a retired local lawyer who specialized in property disputes. He listened carefully to my predicament, sipping on black coffee as we sat in his modest office. Then he said, "This might get expensive, but there's a chance we can prove the structure is grandfathered in. I'll need all documents you have on the dock's origin." He suggested we also keep an eye out for other potential avenues, local environmental laws, public land boundaries, anything that might help. Meanwhile, I found out about an annual fishing festival that took place every summer at Lakeshore Springs. People from nearby towns would come in droves to participate in fishing competitions, buy local goods, and attend barbecues. The festival was the highlight of the year for many residents. Apparently, the lake was renowned for its bass. My father used to mention that a particular area near my dock was a prime spawning ground that had always been his secret spot. I filed away that piece of information, not sure if it would help. My days blurred into a cycle of reading legal statutes, flipping through boxes of old family photos, searching for any record that could prove the dock's legitimacy. All the while, I felt Karen's presence looming. She'd walk past my property, shooting me disapproving glares. She'd chat with neighbors, pointing at my dock as if it were an eyesore. Then, one late afternoon, I was cleaning out my father's old workshop near the lakefront. Hidden in a dusty cabinet, I discovered a small folder labeled Dock Permits. Inside, I found a handful of papers referencing local building regulations from the 1970s. My father had apparently applied for some form of county permit. It wasn't an HOA approval. It predated the HOA, but it indicated the county recognized the dock's existence. I felt a spark of hope surge through me. I rushed to this folder to Mr. Whitmore. He read the documents carefully, adjusting his reading glasses. "Interesting," he murmured. "This might support your argument that the dock was lawfully built, though the HOA will likely still claim they have authority now." I folded my arms, frustration returning. "So it doesn't guarantee I can keep it?" Mr. Whitmore frowned slightly. "Guaranteed, no, but it's a useful piece of evidence." A week later, Karen mailed out official notices about the new community pier project. It would be built near her side of the lake, funded by necessary community dues. Meanwhile, my monthly HOA fee had inexplicably gone up. A neighbor, Beth, confided in me that she suspected misappropriation of funds. "Karen and her contractor friend are too cozy," she whispered. "They want a fancy pier for the annual fishing festival so they can take credit for improving the community." My jaw tightened. I realized that if my dock was labeled a nuisance, the path would be clear for her dream project, one that would line her pockets or at least boost her local prestige. The showdown came sooner than expected. One morning, I awoke to hammering noises. Looking out my window, I saw a crew unloading metal fencing. A tall chain-link fence began to rise along the boundary between my backyard and the shoreline. Furious, I rushed outside. Karen was standing there in a crisp blouse and pencil skirt, supervising the workers. She barely glanced at me. "This is for safety. Your dock is a hazard," she announced, her voice dripping with false politeness. "You can't do this. That's my property," I said, my heart pounding. She gave me a condescending smile. "The Lakeshore Zone is communal territory, under the HOA guidelines, subject to board's rules. If you want access to your boat, you can remove the dock and apply for a new structure that meets standards." I felt my fists clench, but I remembered my attorney's advice to avoid any physical or verbal altercation that could be used against me. I simply took photos, documented everything, and tried to remain calm. That evening, while reviewing the new fence line, I noticed that part of the fence extended beyond the recognized property boundary, inching into the actual water. That was significant. If they fenced into the water, they might be violating county or state regulations related to navigable waterways. Whitmore confirmed my suspicion the next day. There's a gray area here. It depends on whether the lake is considered publicly accessible or fully private. Let's check local land records. He made some calls, discovered the lake was partly under state jurisdiction for environmental protection. That meant the HOA did not have unfettered rights to fence off the water itself. This was a potential angle we could exploit. While we pursued that, I also dug deeper into the annual fishing festival. It turned out the entire lakeside area was crucial for the event. Anglers cast lines all around the perimeter. The lake's ecology thrived on healthy fish populations, especially bass. I remembered my father's assertion that the zone near our dock served as a spawning ground for these fish. If that were scientifically proven, any new construction or disruptive fence might require environmental permits, possibly halting Karen's precious community pier. I reached out to a local marine biologist named Dr. Collins, who specialized in freshwater ecosystems. I explained the situation, asked if she would do an assessment. She agreed to come by the following weekend with her team and survey the lake near my dock. Karen caught wind of this and promptly emailed me with a warning. Unauthorized scientific activities within HOA boundaries may violate community guidelines. That email only emboldened me further. Dr. Collins's team arrived on a Saturday morning. They brought small boats, underwater cameras, sampling gear. I watched from my yard as they carefully documented aquatic plants and fish habitats. Karen stood on the other side of the fence, arms folded, lips pressed in disapproval. "This is private property. You have no right to gather data here," she yelled. Dr. Collins calmly informed her that the water itself was under the state's purview and that she had a research permit. Karen fumed. The survey took hours. I helped them haul gear, holding on to a glimmer of hope. If we found evidence that these waters were essential to bass breeding, the HOA might be forced to reconsider any fence or pier near that zone. The next day, Dr. Collins called me. "We discovered some significant spawning beds near your dock. That area is indeed critical for the bass population. There are environmental protections that may apply. I'll share my preliminary findings with the relevant agencies." I nearly shouted with joy when I hung up. But before I could celebrate, a new problem emerged. The HOA started slapping me with fines. Each day, I kept the hazardous dock. I owed $200, 0 cents, with an added $50, 0 cents each subsequent month. It was financially crippling. I reached out to Mr. Whitmore again. He advised me to place the fines in dispute, keep track of them, and prepared to present our case in court if needed. It felt like a man walking through quicksand. Every time I made a move, Karen found a way to pull me deeper into trouble. One afternoon, as I was hauling groceries from my car, I saw a few neighbors chatting near the fence. Their eyes kept darting to me. I recognized a woman named Linda, someone I had always considered friendly. She approached, wearing a hesitant smile. "We heard you're causing trouble for the fishing festival," she said, her tone tinged with caution. My stomach twisted. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm just trying to keep my dock." Linda exchanged a glance with the others. "Karen said you filed complaints with the county that might shut down the festival if the new pier is delayed or blocked." I realized that Karen had begun spinning a narrative that I was the villain, threatening their beloved tradition. That night, I scrolled through the Lakeshore Springs Community Forum. Sure enough, there was a post by Karen painting me as the obstructionist homeowner who refused to follow rules and threatened the success of the festival. Dozens of residents chimed in, some calling me selfish, others expressing concern about losing their cherished event. I felt anger and despair swirl inside me. No wonder Linda had approached me with such suspicion. Desperate to clear my name, I crafted my own forum post explaining that I loved the festival and only wanted to protect my father's dock. I also pointed out the potential environmental sensitivity of that area, urging caution before building any new pier. I ended it by saying I was open to compromise. Some people responded sympathetically, others doubted me, swayed by Karen's words. The tension in the community was palpable. Meanwhile, Dr. Collins submitted her official report to the county's Department of Environmental Conservation. She recommended that any large-scale construction or permanent fencing near the spawning beds be paused until a thorough environmental review could be done. Word reached Karen quickly. I received a scathing email from her. "Congratulations, you've placed the entire festival at risk. The DNR might issue a protective order banning fishing in that zone if they deem it critical habitat. Way to ruin our community traditions." For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. After all, if the DNR stepped in, a significant portion of the lake might be off limits for the festival. But I reminded myself that my father's dock and the fish population deserved protection. If the HOA had cooperated from the start, we could have found a solution that balanced tradition with preservation. As predicted, the Department of Environmental Conservation sent a letter to the HOA, citing potential ecological concerns. They put a temporary hold on any new construction near the lakeshore. They also set a date for an official inspection. Karen, in turn, held an emergency HOA meeting to address the crisis. Word spread quickly, and this time the meeting room was packed with residents, anxious about the fate of their beloved festival. When I arrived, the air crackled with tension. Karen stood at the front, arms raised to quiet the crowd. She began by blaming me, calling me a troublesome newcomer who leveraged environmental laws to sabotage the community's beloved event. People muttered and glared in my direction. I felt heat creeping up my neck, but forced myself to remain calm. When she finished her rant, I raised my hand. "May I speak?" She pursed her lips. "Be brief." I walked to the front, my heart pounding. "I'm not trying to sabotage the festival. I'm trying to defend my father's dock, which predates the HOA. Karen's push for a new pier directly conflicts with an important fish spawning ground. That's not my personal opinion, it's the assessment of a qualified biologist." I held up a copy of Dr. Collins's report. "I want the festival to happen. I just want it done responsibly without bulldozing a critical habitat or ignoring property rights." Some in the crowd seemed taken aback by my direct tone. A few heads nodded slightly, others remained skeptical. Karen stepped closer. "So you're saying if we don't build that new pier, your dock stays? And if we do try to build, you shut everything down with your environmental red tape?" She smirked. "That sounds like blackmail." A man with a graying beard jumped in. "We've had that festival for decades without any issues. Why is it suddenly a problem now?" Another voice piped up. "He's messing it up with these so-called spawning grounds. Probably doesn't even exist." My frustration flared. "It does exist. The fish have been spawning there for years. My father used to show me the nests right under our dock. We never blocked the festival, we just coexisted." Karen attempted to regain control. "Enough. The board has decided Mr. Parsons' structure remains in violation. The festival is at risk because of his actions. If the county imposes a protective zone, that's on him. Meeting adjourned." She slammed a small gavel. The crowd broke into clusters of whispered debates. Some people shot me nasty looks, others appeared thoughtful. I felt a knot in my stomach. Over the next week, speculation ran rampant about whether the DNR would impose restrictions in time for the festival. Karen ramped up the rhetoric online, accusing me of single-handedly destroying a 40-year tradition. I tried my best to post calm, factual responses, but sensationalism spreads faster than nuance. A group of residents started calling themselves Protect Our Festival, distributing flyers that called me out by name. They demanded I withdraw my environmental complaint. I refused. The facts were on my side, even if public sentiment wavered. Then, a surprising ally emerged. Linda, the neighbor who'd initially seemed wary, knocked on my door one evening. She looked nervous. I've been thinking a lot about what's happening," she said softly. "My dad used to fish with your father. He always talked about how important that area was for spawning." She took a breath. "I think Karen is pushing for this pier because she's got some deal with a contractor. She spreads so many rumors about you that people don't know what to believe. But I remember your dad. He cared about this lake." Her words filled me with a mixture of relief and sadness. Linda offered to gather a few neighbors willing to listen to the real story. We met at her house, a small group of about 7 people, including Dave. I explained how the HOA's fence had intruded into the water, how the environment study showed critical spawning grounds, how Karen refused to consider alternative pier locations that wouldn't harm the fish habitat. By the end, Linda and the others seemed convinced. They decided to speak up at the next HOA meeting or on the community forum to counter Karen's narrative. Encouraged by their support, I dug further into the finances for the new pier. With Whitmore's guidance, we discovered that Karen had steered the contract to a construction company with ties to her cousin. That potential conflict of interest could be a bombshell, but we needed proof. I filed a request under local open records rules for any official communications between the HOA and the contractor. As my conflict with Karen escalated, the DNR official inspection drew closer. The day before the inspectors arrived, I stepped out onto my porch and saw Karen pacing near the fence line, her phone pressed against her ear. She seemed agitated. I couldn't hear her exact words, but from her body language, it looked like an urgent conversation. When she noticed me watching, she shot me an icy glare and turned away. The next morning, 2 inspectors from the DNR came by. They introduced themselves as Ms. Patterson and Mr. Lopez. Both wore official uniforms and carried clipboards. They politely asked if they could examine the shoreline near my property. Karen appeared moments later, walking briskly over with an air of friendliness. "Welcome to Lakeshore Springs. I'm the HOA president, Karen. I can show you the relevant areas." Miss Patterson nodded. "Thank you. We'll start here at Mr. Parsons's dock if that's all right." As Miss Patterson and Mr. Lopez took water samples, Karen hovered, trying to interject comments about the perilous condition of my dock. Mr. Lopez gave her a neutral look and said, "Ma'am, we'll assess everything fairly, but we need to conduct these tests without distractions." Karen backed off, but her frustration was evident. An hour later, Miss Patterson told me, "We did find evidence that matches Dr. Collins' report. There are active bass spawning beds in this zone. If that's the case, certain regulations might restrict large-scale construction or permanent barriers." Karen forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Surely there's a way to proceed with the festival pier?" Miss Patterson shrugged gently. "We can't say for sure yet. A more detailed analysis must be completed. For now, we recommend halting any new construction." Karen's face hardened. That evening, I could practically sense the panic emanating from Karen's house. She called for another emergency HOA meeting the following weekend. This time, the room was overflowing with anxious residents. The fishing festival was only 2 months away. If the DNR decided to impose a no-fishing zone near the spawning grounds, the event might be severely limited. A lot of local businesses depended on that festival for summer income. Tensions were at a boiling point. Sharon opened the meeting by accusing me of colluding with the DNR to sabotage the festival. She claimed I was using environmental technicalities to hold the community hostage until they let me keep my unsafe dock. I shot to my feet. "That's outrageous. You're twisting the facts. My dock isn't unsafe. I have documents to prove it was lawfully built, and an inspection would confirm its structural integrity. If you had worked with me from the beginning, we could have found a solution." A tall woman in the back called out, "We just want our festival. Is there any way to keep it without harming the fish?" Another man near the front yelled, "We need that revenue from out-of-towners. How else will local shops survive?" Karen saw an opening to manipulate public emotion. She strode to the center. "Everyone, I share your concern. But as long as this environmental review is pending, we might lose our chance to complete the new pier. which was going to be the focal point for the festival's fishing competition. She threw a sharp glance at me. "We can't proceed while Mr. Parsons keeps stirring up trouble." I opened my mouth to protest, but surprisingly Linda rose from her chair. "Karen, that's not fair. You wanted to build a pier right where the fish spawn. Mr. Parsons is just defending what was already there. And you were fine ignoring potential environmental laws to push your agenda. Let's not blame him for the consequences." A murmur spread through the crowd. It was the first time I'd heard such an open defense from a neighbor, and I silently thanked Linda for her courage. Karen's face flushed. "I, for one, believe the fish will adapt. The festival is a tradition. It's good for the community. Why should we let one homeowner's stubbornness ruin everything?" Someone else chimed in. "But you also forced a fence around his property. That's not exactly fair, is it?" Karen's expression darkened. She realized she was losing some support, so she hurriedly called for a vote to increase my fine. The board, all except one timid member, voted yes. My fines doubled overnight. Infuriated, I decided it was time to go on the offensive. I posted on the community forum, revealing what I'd found about Karen's ties to the contractor. I carefully laid out the timeline: the new pier proposal, the inflated budget estimates, the cousin connection. I also attached scanned images of my father's original county permit application, showing that the dock had been recognized by local authorities for decades. The post went viral within our small community. Comments poured in, some outraged at the possibility of corruption, others demanding Karen step down. True to form, Karen fought back with every weapon at her disposal. She blasted me with more violation notices, claiming my lawn was improperly landscaped, that my mailbox design was non-standard. She threatened to cut off my access to the clubhouse and community pool. Most of these allegations were petty, but they piled up like a mountain of harassment. I kept a meticulous record. Then came the bombshell. The DNR issued a preliminary notice restricting fishing within 300 feet of the spawning ground for the next 2 months to protect the developing bass. That radius covered more than half the prime shoreline used for the festival. Karen erupted, declaring the festival effectively doomed if they couldn't fish in that zone. She pointed to me as the culprit. I pointed back to her for trying to build a pier in the worst possible spot. The entire community seemed to split into factions, some supporting me, some loyal to Karen, and many just upset about possibly losing their summer tradition. On the day the final DNR ruling arrived, I was out by the fence, staring at my now inaccessible dock with sadness and anger swirling in my head. A postal carrier handed me a certified envelope. Inside was an official letter stating that the spawning area was indeed critical habitat and would be protected for the upcoming season. All new construction or significant modifications in that zone must be halted pending a full environmental impact study. Furthermore, the DNR strongly advised relocating any proposed pier away from that area. For Karen, this was a death blow to her project. For me, it was vindication. The letter effectively meant my dock couldn't be touched without a thorough review. A sense of triumph mingled with a strange emptiness. Yes, I'd protected my father's dock, but the festival, the community's cherished event, was in jeopardy. That evening, a group of local business owners showed up at my door, concerned about how the partial fishing ban might kill their tourist revenue. They were polite but firm, asking if there was any middle ground. I told them, I never wanted to shut down the festival. I just wanted the HOA to respect the environment and property rights. If we can find a compromise that leaves the dock and also respects the spawning ground, I'd support it. A few days later, the newly emboldened neighbors who had seen through Karen's antics formed a small committee. We met at Dave's house to brainstorm solutions. We discussed adjusting the festival boundaries, maybe focusing the fishing competition on a different part of the lake, or adopting a catch-and-release policy near the spawning area. Linda proposed a smaller secondary pier on the opposite side that wouldn't disturb the habitat. We agreed to present these ideas at the next HOA meeting. When that meeting rolled around, Karen was visibly agitated. Her usual commanding presence had been shaken. I outlined the compromise. Allow me to keep my dock, remove the fence. We'll open a portion of my shoreline for a limited fishing platform if it doesn't disturb the nests. Relocate the main pier to a less sensitive spot. This way, the festival still happens." I looked around the room. Many people appeared intrigued. Karen, however, scoffed. "Why should we appease you when you caused this mess?" I expected that reaction, but Linda and Dave stood up, explaining that I hadn't caused anything. The HOA's reckless approach had triggered the ban. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Then, Beth, another neighbor, brought up the contractor conflict of interest, pointing out that Karen might have pushed the pier for personal gain. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted decisively. People demanded explanations from Karen. She tried to deflect, but the wave of dissatisfaction was too large. One board member, an older gentleman named Mr. Talbot, raised a motion for a no-confidence vote in Karen's leadership. He argued that her conduct had endangered both the environment and the festival. In a dramatic showdown, the majority voted her out. Karen's face turned ashen. She stormed out of the meeting. That moment was surreal. I'd never expected such a public downfall. In the aftermath, the new board members quickly moved to remove the fence around my dock and negotiate with the DNR for a partial festival. They set up a smaller fishing zone away from the protected nests, organized educational booths on lake conservation, and even invited Dr. Collins to give a short presentation about the importance of preserving spawning habitats. The transformation was swift. People realized they could adapt the festival to be more eco-friendly. Soon, local shops started preparing for the event, excited that at least part of the festival was saved. I agreed to let families use part of my shoreline for a scenic walkway, as long as they respected the dock and the water's edge. The tension gradually lessened. I found myself chatting amicably with folks who had once glared at me. Even Linda joked that, ironically, my father's old dock might become a new attraction if the festival drew attention to the bass habitat. But Karen wasn't finished. A month before the festival, I received a lawsuit filed in her name. She demanded $500,000, 0 cents in damages, claiming my interference had caused her emotional distress and defamed her reputation. She sought to be reinstated as HOA president and have my dock demolished. My heart sank as I read the legal jargon, imagining the financial ruin if this were taken to the extreme. I shared the news with the new HOA board. They rolled their eyes, labeling it a desperate last move. My attorney, Mr. Whitmore, was calm. "This is a textbook example of a frivolous lawsuit. We'll file for dismissal. We can even seek sanctions against her for abusing the court system." Nonetheless, the thought of going to court was stressful. The community was outraged. The local paper had caught wind of the fiasco. A reporter published a story laying out Karen's questionable dealings. The court of public opinion swung heavily against her. We faced a preliminary hearing. Karen arrived with an expensive attorney from the city. The hearing was short. The judge sternly questioned the basis of her claims, pointing out that there was no evidence of defamation, no real calculation of damages. After a brief recess, the judge dismissed her suit, warning Karen's attorney that continuing such baseless actions could result in penalties. Karen left the courthouse, refusing to speak to reporters. With Karen's legal attempts thwarted, the final hurdle was ensuring the festival went smoothly. True to the adjustments, the event ended up being more environmentally conscious and better organized than ever. I volunteered my dock for a small demonstration area where kids could learn about the fish habitats. Dr. Collins gave short talks explaining why certain parts of the lake were off limits. Interestingly, the restricted zone made fishing in the permitted zone even more exciting. Fish populations were healthy, and some large bass were caught on the festival's opening day. Vendors reported solid sales. Families strolled around happily. It was a triumph none of us had anticipated months earlier. Once the festival concluded, the new HOA board wrote a formal letter acknowledging that my dock was indeed grandfathered in and that no further action would be taken against it. They retracted all fines, apologized for the inconvenience, and promised more transparency moving forward. I felt a mixture of relief and pride, standing on my dock at sunset, watching the reflections of the last festival boats drifting across the water. I thought of my father, imagining his grin if he could see how his little dock had become a symbol of preserving community values. In the weeks that followed, rumors spread that Karen had sold her house and moved away. Some said she took a job out of state. Others whispered that she was lying low until the contractor controversy died down. Either way, the storm she caused had subsided, leaving the neighborhood more unified than before, albeit with a keen awareness that they needed to watch for any future abuse of power. As for me, I returned to my routine. Only now I walked the lakeshore without worry of fences or fines. My neighbors often waved or stopped to chat. They'd ask how the fish were biting near my dock. They'd reminisce about the festival's success. Occasionally I caught a glimpse of a father teaching his child to fish in that newly protected area, and I'd feel a soft ache of nostalgia, remembering my own father and all those mornings we spent there. This entire ordeal, while painful, had reminded me of one simple truth. Sometimes preserving what matters to you requires standing firm, even if it means taking on an entire system. Now, whenever I tell the story of how HOA Karen threatened my boat access and how I shut down their fishing season, I do it with a wry smile. Folks usually gasp at the part where she fenced off my own dock, but I like to point out that in the end, it wasn't just about one dock or one festival. It was about a community waking up to corruption. It was about fish that needed a safe place to spawn. It was about the memory of a father's legacy living on in the creek of old boards by the lake. And all it took was the perseverance of a few determined neighbors, willing to push back when someone tried to seize too much power. I suppose if there's a moral to this tale, it's that doing the right thing can feel like a lonely road at first. People might label you a troublemaker or accuse you of ruining their traditions. But once the truth surfaces, once the evidence comes to light, those same folks often realize that by protecting one small piece of the world, they're preserving something much bigger. I learned that justice sometimes demands you outsmart those who abuse their influence. You don't always need to shout the loudest, but you do need to be persistent, armed with facts, and unafraid of standing alone when everyone else is swayed by fear or gossip. These days, I still feel a flicker of anger recalling Karen's smug face, but it's overshadowed by gratitude for the people who stood by me. The new pier project, relocated to a less sensitive part of the shore, eventually got approved. It was built with environmentally friendly materials, and it has become a modest but welcome addition. Each spring, the fish still return to spawn beneath my father's dock, a gentle reminder that some traditions, both human and natural, can coexist if we respect them both. I sit on that dock now, letting my bare feet dangle over the water. When the breeze lifts, I hear a soft creak of the planks beneath me. I raise a cold drink to the setting sun, content in the knowledge that, for once, the big bully didn't win. My father's handiwork stands as a testament that a single individual with enough determination can bring a self-serving organization to its knees. Maybe I didn't mean to shut down the fishing season entirely, but in this battle, I made sure they couldn't bulldoze my rights without facing the consequences. And that is how the story ends, with a peaceful lake, a cherished old dock, and a community that finally saw past the schemes of one power-hungry HOA president. In the ripples dancing under the twilight, I see the reflection of a victory that belongs to more than just me. It belongs to every neighbor who dared to speak out, every fish that now spawns safely under the battered beams, every child who will learn the balance between people and nature. We all share this shoreline. We've learned that preserving its legacy is worth every struggle. So if you ever face a bully who wields rules and fines to get their way, if you ever feel cornered by an HOA Karen who believes she can override your history and your rights, remember this story. Stand your ground, rally the facts, gather allies who know the difference between intimidation and true leadership. In the end, All it takes is a little courage, a few well-documented letters, and a willingness to fight for the place you call home. When you do, no fence or threat can shatter what truly holds a community together. And if you happen to be sipping a cool drink on your own cherished dock while the setting sun ignites the water in golds and purples, take a moment to smile at how simple boards and nails can represent so much more than wood. They hold our memories, our family's stories, our shared future. They remind us that, sometimes, all it takes is one determined voice to say no and change the entire tide.